Welcome to another episode of Mike Reads. Tonight we'll be continuing in our series on Thomas Sowell's Economic Facts and Fallacies with our fourth and final read in Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is entitled Academic Facts and Fallacies, and tonight's read is going to be in the section Summary and Conclusions. As I've mentioned throughout the course of this read, we are doing this series as a parallel read with Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. So I'll put a link in this video's description to that series so you can follow along there as well. I like to normally alternate these reads since we're doing them as parallel reads. But today we're going to go from one read in Sowell to another read straight to another read in Sowell, only because tonight's read is so short and so self-explanatory and kind of sums up the chapter and allows us to get to a good stopping point that I figured, while last night's read is still fresh in our minds, let's just go ahead and finish off Chapter 4. With that being said, the read is so short at barely more than a page that we're not really going to do an analysis and review. As I've mentioned throughout the course of this series, I normally do an analysis and review at the end of each read, which I normally timestamp in the description so you can jump straight to that if you'd like. Today's analysis and review for the DMCA folks over at YouTube is that the read is fairly self-explanatory and just simply summarizes concepts we've already gone over. So if there's anything in this read that you find confusing, I encourage you to go back to any of the three previous reads, jump straight to the analysis and review, because again, we've already reviewed everything that's going to be in this read. So since it's such a short read, I'm rambling here. Let's dive right on into finishing up Chapter 4, Academic Facts and Fallacies, with Summary and Conclusions. Many of the economic and educational decisions made at colleges and universities seem inexplicable as the actions of institutions pursuing either the best interests of the students or the best interests of the institutions themselves as institutions. However, the actions of academic institutions are much more readily understood as responses to the incentives and constraints facing the various particular decision makers, such as professors, administrators, trustees, athletic coaches, and others pursuing their own self-interests. Such internal conflicts of interest with the overall purposes of the institution as a whole are much more readily constrained in a profit-seeking enterprise, where the difference between profit and loss is the difference between survival and extinction, and where stockholders and outside financial institutions react to both the short-run and long-run implications of decisions of the profit-seeking enterprise. Where the ultimate test is satisfying paying customers and investors rather than people inside the organization, there are inherent limits of the extent to which self-indulgences among insiders can be tolerated. Where nonprofit institutions differ most from profit-seeking institutions is not in the pursuit or receipt of money, but in the range of their options in deciding what to do with it. That range of options is much more narrowly confined in the case of profit-seeking businesses, which must meet the desires of their paying customers and of investors who finance these institutions if they expect to continue in business. But nonprofit organizations like colleges and universities receive much money from people whose desires do not count, not only taxpayers, but also deceased donors who have contributed either to the institution's endowment or to particular academic programs. As much as academic institutions may seek earmarked funds from government, they discourage the earmarking of funds from donors and, in some cases, have spent the money for things very different from what the donor specified. As already noted, the wide range of discretion by academic institutions has included self-indulgences by faculty which add directly or indirectly to the costs paid by students or to a lower quality of their education when professors turn courses over to their graduate students to teach or limit the range of views presented in their own courses or among the new faculty who are hired by the old faculty. In an earlier era, nonprofit institutions such as universities, hospitals, or foundations engaged in more racial and ethnic discrimination than profit-seeking enterprises, which had a narrower range of economically viable options. For example, hundreds of black chemists were employed in private industry before World War II, when not a single major university had a black professor of chemistry, or of anything else. Columbia University went more than 150 years before it had its first Jewish full professor. Similar patterns could be found in many nonprofit hospitals that had neither black nor Jewish doctors, even though there were many such doctors with thriving private practices. Discrimination entails costs on the discriminators, as well as on those discriminated against, but such costs are borne by other people, not by those who make discriminatory decisions in the case of nonprofit organizations. By the same token, the costs of racial or ethnic preferences in a later era have also been borne by other people, so that the same nonprofit organizations, which once discriminated against blacks, for example, could now afford to show preferences for blacks as students or professors, because the costs of these preferences are likewise paid by others. So that concludes tonight's read, and it concludes Chapter 4. Our next read in Thomas Sowell's Economic Facts and Fallacies will begin Chapter 5, which is entitled Income, Facts, and Fallacies. So until then, this has been Mike, signing off.